Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. As always, this is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at our state-of-the-art radio program, Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, folks, without any further ado, let's go ahead and delve into the topic I have selected for this program, because it's a big one. It's one that we are seeing rise to the surface time and again, particularly in this modern era of politics and social media. And it's the era of censorship. Censorship, of course, is not new, and I'll get more into that. But what is new is the way that we're seeing it come to the surface, the way that we're seeing the tech oligarchs that are operating as a monopolistic cabal, with carte blanche and anti-competitive zeal is new. They have more power than any company has ever had. They have more power than the robber barons did at the height of the Gilded Age, and they are flaunting it. They are flaunting it to a horrific degree because they are basically working in tandem with the government. They have become a slimy tool, an agent of the government. And they're doing it very haphazardly. They're doing it very selectively. And they are essentially creating a memory hole. But not just a memory hole. They are creating a vacuous vacuum in which a certain mindset, a certain ideology, a certain frame of mind and approach to freedom and liberty is being intentionally silenced. And for what purpose? Well, it's for power, manipulation, and control. It's always about control. But there have been, over the course of this past week in particular, but indeed over the course of this whole past approximate 2 years or so, a very concerted effort at silencing certain channels. And we see here that these channels have been selected haphazardly, and in most instances, months after they released the initial supposedly offending videos on a haphazard basis, in a seemingly selected basis that had already passed muster the one time, but now aren't because some troll has essentially gone onto their channels and has complained for no other reason than they are attempting to act like the Stasi of our era, the KGB of our era, the Gestapo of our era, because they don't like what's being said. And the channels that have been targeted most recently is Dan Bongino, famous radio correspondent and wonderful correspondent. He's also involved financially in Rumble. He's been supporting Rumble and some of these various other alternative tech sites, which I think we do need to be supporting, and I'm going to actually start looking in depth and detail about slowly getting over there, because I do this as a hobby. I do this for our audience. I enjoy interacting with the audience. I enjoy reaching out to the public because I do view the interaction of average, ordinary citizens as the new media. I view this as a way to curtail the attempts that the tech oligarchs, the way that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the legacy media, and the way that Biden and the Democrats and even mainstream GOP Republicans, the gutless opposition party types, have attempted to be gatekeepers and have attempted to keep the wool over our eyes. The way to get around that is the interaction that we have here. And they recognize this. They recognize the propagandist control that they had is beginning to fall apart, and that is causing them to react in the way that they are. They're reacting in this way because we are making a difference. And so that terrifies them. But we see that they silence Bongino, over so-called medical misinformation. And of course, the terms for that are vague and ambiguous. The terms of service agreement is arbitrary, and it's being enforced in an unconscionable way, and therefore it's essentially creating an illusory contract. It's an unenforceable contract, and they do need to be challenged legally, and that's why I'm glad that Steven Crowder has challenged them, and I'll get a little more into that a little later on. But we see that Styx Hexenhammer 666, who has been fairly spot on with his analysis of polling data and electoral information and political information for years, has been struck. He received a 1-week strike, but then appealed it and it got overturned. But he's still basically making all of his YouTube presence a bare minimum, and that's a shame because he's been pretty much what I would consider a power user on the platform for over a decade. And then we see that the Rageaholic Razor Fist was struck for so-called electoral misinformation for a video that he put out months ago that was accurate. On the same day that the Pennsylvania court strikes down one of the offensive measures that was part of the questions leading up to the integrity of the 2020 election. And this is why I've been kind of dancing around with my words here, because YouTube is becoming so draconian with this stuff that it's hard to know when and who will be next. And we know that it'll be months down, but if I do frame my words carefully, I can bring up legal challenges. But of course, legal challenges take time, and they're slow. Like I've said in previous episodes, the wheels of justice turn quite slowly. But they're doing this because they want us to self-censor. They are purposefully chilling the use of their platform, the use and dissemination of information, and it's all by design. All of it. It is all to push a propagandist agenda to basically narrow things down so that only one point of view is out there. That's their design. That's what they've been pushing for this entire time. Now, what's good is that there are alternatives out there. You know, there's BitChute, there's Rumble, there's Odyssey, there's Minds. That's something I'm going to look into. Of course, again, I do this mostly as a hobby, so I don't have infinite time to look into those things. But at the same time, I don't want to give up on this platform either. I want to be a thorn in their side. And we should all want to be thorns in their side because we cannot give up an inch. We cannot let them just have this. Because they have been dubious and deceitful in their actions with all of this. But Steven Crowder, as we all know, over the course of the past year and more, has been targeted by YouTube in increasing increments, to the point that he's even had his half-Asian attorney Bill Richmond file legal paperwork against them, legal actions against them, and they do their certain time spans on their bans in such a way as to make it difficult to have a case, because in law you have to have a justiciable case. That means you have to have an actionable damage, a harm that is still actionable. It can either be not ripe yet, meaning that no damage has occurred, which is what they used so often with the electoral issues in 2020, or it's a moot question, meaning that it's already basically closed out, that there's no longer a legal issue to be acted upon. And that's a game they play too. Justiciability is always one of the games that they play, to sit there and say you lack standing. And we saw that time and again. The courts like to play that little dalliance of a game. And so That is the difficulty that legal teams will run into, but we can draw it out. And we can certainly tie it into other things, such as lost revenue for future earnings. And there may be a chance that, we don't win on that, but that doesn't matter. We do it anyway to essentially become a thorn in their side. But I did like what Styx had to say a while back when he was first being harassed a little bit and was certainly recording a lot of the censorship actions that had happened with other channels. He said the way to really fight this is to become non-censorable. I think that's part of it. But I think we also have to be a thorn in their side. And that's what we have to do. But this whole idea of censorship, even though the misinformation part of it is their new way of flexing, is certainly not a new idea. And just the other day, I was looking through some of the old histories on Rush Limbaugh, because I do find his career fascinating. He revolutionized radio in a way that was unique. It was viewed certainly as AM talk radio, which is what he dominated on. It was viewed as a dying art form, and yet he brought it back. And why was it viewed as a dying art form? Well, because government regulation had made it to where you really couldn't have op-ed pieces or opinion shows because they had what was known as the Fairness Doctrine, which meant that you had to provide equal amounts of time to opposing views. It was censorship in all but name. And I know that during the early aughts, and then in the second decade of the 21st century, around the time that I was just finishing up law school, the Fairness Doctrine was a hot-button, hot-ticket item again, because they were, again, pushing for it. Airhead America had failed. That was left-wing radio. Think of Alan Colmes and his failed attempts to have dominance in the field of talk radio. They wanted a Fairness Doctrine because, again, they knew that their ideology, the message that they champion, just doesn't perform well in a free market system. Why? Who wants to hear them? They're miserable. And that was one of the things that Rush always said, that there would never be a left-wing equivalent of, the lovable, harmless little fuzzball, El Rushbo, because he loved what he was doing. His whole moniker was having more fun than a human being should be allowed to have. Of course, that was taking jabs at the left and this very type of behavior, this course of conduct that we see right now. The way that the big tech oligarchs are doubling down, the way that Twitter kicks people off, and the way that they target people for having a wrong opinion, at least as deemed by they themselves. He was targeting that. And he said that they didn't enjoy themselves because they're bitter. They're just about anger. They're about dissension. They're about division. And yes, that is absolutely what they are about. And that is exactly why they are acting the way that they are, and why they seek to silence anyone who holds a contrary opinion to their own. And as that plays out time and again, it leads to this sort of condition that we have now. It's always the path to totalitarianism with the left, because they cannot compete, and they do not want to compete. They want monopoly. And so Silicon Valley has become this sort of Leviathan, for want of a better term, in that they are clamping down on anyone who holds a differing opinion, anyone who has advice or views that differ from theirs is now persona non grata, someone to be feared, someone not to be tolerated, someone to be shut up and shut out of society. That's their design. That's their plan. That's their modus operandi. That is the overarching end goals and objectives that they are marching lock, stock, and barrel towards. It's where we are. And unfortunately, it does not show signs of improving at any point within the foreseeable future. But going back to this idea of the fairness doctrine, and when Rush Limbaugh was basically getting his meteoric rise to fame back in the very early 90s, we see that for 30 years, censorship has been there, and even longer. It's been literally about a century. But it was 30 years ago that the golden era of real, true, free speech was allowed to dominate in the radio, and that allowed shows like Rush Limbaugh, then later Hannity, later Glenn Beck, all of these various shows to rise up and to become national personalities. You really didn't have that before during the fairness doctrine, the rare exception being Paul Harvey. Usually you just had your local hosts, and they did their best to basically mire down in this nonsense of a fake objectivity. Well, they did that so that they didn't have to do the fairness doctrine, and that's where the true frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist agenda was able to ensnare itself into media and became the dominant form of media. But, the major difference between the fairness doctrine and today is, as I said, it's the few companies that we have controlling it. The Twitters, the Googles, the Alphabets, the Facebooks, the Zuckerbergs, used to be Jack Dorsey, but now we've got that other guy that's replaced him. Those amorphous, unaccountable companies acting in a way to claim that they are ensuring that the integrity of the system's there to keep it fair. It's the fairness doctrine all over again, but it's being enforced top down in anti-competitive and monopolistic fashion. And so what we see here in the modern one is that what started as a purge of alleged radicals, think of Alex Jones being pushed off of all of these sites, think of the way that they did with Crowder, think of the way that they have done it with people like Nick Fuentes and others. It starts off there, but it then spreads and metastasizes to regular voices. More mainstream voices. And look at what they're trying to do with Joe Rogan. It's insanity. It's absolute insanity. And really, if you want to see the lofty heights of how far they're willing to push this, look at how they silenced Donald Trump. On Twitter and on Facebook, everywhere. That's why he's creating his own Truth Social. And yes, I know there's backlash about the artificial intelligence type of censorship that's supposedly going to go on there too, but that's to get the mainstream conservative voices. There are certain battles that you have to fight, and you have to take it a step at a time, and you have to choose your battles. Choosing your battles is going to be half of it. But the main thing is what they are hoping is that it'll stop us, that we won't have a way to stop them. But how do we stop them? Well, we refuse to be silent. We refuse to leave. We support alternative platforms, and we become a thorn in their side by refusing to fully comply and to give them full control. We have to be the masters of our own destiny. We have to be ready, willing, and able to say enough is enough. And so that's what we are going to do. And that's what we will keep doing. And that's why I'm going to keep making these shows. I make these shows for you, because I want you to be empowered too. You see, it's about power. Let's be the ones that maintain true power. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at the Wright Flyer. I hope to see you again next time. Please do take care. See you around.